I booked an Airbnb in a major Canadian city for me and 3 friends. It was a private suite kind of deal in a large house that seemed to be all suites being rented out, but not all by the same host. In advance of the trip, the host was friendly and responsive. She wasn't going to be there at check-in, but left instructions that seemed straightforward enough. Get the key out of a lockbox outside the building, and the unit is inside. Sure, no problem. We had originally asked about early check-in, but it wasn't possible because cleaners were going to be there, so we said no problem and just took our bags around with us. We arrived about an hour after the earliest check-in time. We got the keys from the lockbox without a problem, got into the house no problem, and then couldn't find the unit number. Between 5 of us, another friend was with us to hang out but not spending the night, walking around the entire place, knocking on doors and trying our key in every lock. Sorry to the other guests we scared, we could not find our unit at all. I was frantically messaging the host during this time, but got no response. She didn't leave her phone number, so I got in touch with Airbnb support. They had a number for her and tried to call several times, but also had no response. While I was on the phone, my friends continued walking around the entire property, even trying to see if they could recognize the windows in the listing from the outside by the curtains. Eventually I told the support people I wanted to cancel, but they initially gave me a hard time because I was already checked in. I told them no, I couldn't have checked into a unit I couldn't find. It took another hour of being bounced around between agents and explaining the situation over and over while they waited for a response from the owner. They also said they had a policy to give her a certain amount of time to respond before they could move forward with the cancellation. Finally they canceled the reservation and processed my refund, and we left to stay in a hotel after checking and finding that no other Airbnbs in the area were even remotely in our price range. Support didn't offer to help us find a new place and I didn't know I could ask them. A few hours later I got bombarded with angry messages from the host saying that I was rude and awful, and that there was no problem with her unit and I was making up stories. I didn't reply. Fast forward a week, I got an email that she left a review for me. Because I was technically checked in for all of 3 hours, it was still processed that I had stayed there, so we could leave reviews for each other. I contacted support again and had to re-explain the situation. They tried to tell me that she was allowed to leave a review because I had stayed there. I told them no, they needed to review the notes of what happened. The reservation was cancelled because I couldn't find it to check in. They sent me the text of her review. She said that I came into the unit, used the shower and left a huge mess, and then lied about not being able to get in so I could cancel the reservation. I told them again to review my side of what had happened. Finally they did, and they removed her pending review. I never left one for her, and I still wonder where the fuck that unit was because 5 people, plus some kind strangers in another unit who got invested in our cause and tried to help, couldn't find it in 2 hours of searching. As a guest, fly several thousand miles and show up at the Airbnb and the door code doesn't work. I called the host and they said they sold the house several months ago and blamed it on Airbnb for not canceling the reservations. I found their website and left an honest review. In return, I was harassed by this billion-dollar management group for several weeks. As a host, on multiple occasions guests used my houses to sell/use drugs. One time a guest overdosed and almost died. Another time, the guests stole everything out of the house to fund their drug addictions. Both occasions, guests left used needles all over the house. Our first guest ever did $5,000 in damages. There was oil stains on couches and beds. We later found out they were shooting porn. Parents booked teenage kids to have a rager at one of the houses and we immediately caught on to what was happening after the 20th kid walked into the house. After being there for 2 hours, they broke a couch, stained all the duvet covers, and were smoking blunts. One time my outdoor cameras were down and a family booked for Easter, max of 6 guests. They showed up with 50+ guests and didn't find out until the neighbors called me. By that time, the guests had done $10,000 in damage. Marine boot decides to throw a rager after returning from boot camp. Shows up with trash can and 30 bottles of alcohol to make jungle juice. Kids broke a couch, smoked inside, and trashed the place. Cops show up and they jumped out of windows and broke several of them. Multiple guests ignored our signs and used flushable wipes and clog main drains and get upset when they see the bill. There's so much more that happens, like asking for refunds weeks after their stay or threatening to sue over the review we gave them. Or guests using white towels to clean up clogged toilets. I just experienced an Airbnb nightmare. I went to the place that I had rented a room in and discovered that there's no home or building at the address I was given. I tried texting the host and got no response. A call to the same number produced a message from the phone system that his phone was disconnected. That experience was bad enough, but the real nightmare was my many subsequent, and failed, attempts to get support from Airbnb. I called Airbnb customer service at least eight times and got hung up on every time, but not before being asked to tap a link in a text message. Tapping the link never worked. Finally, I used my friend's phone and got through to a rep who put me on hold for at least 15 minutes. The rep never returned to the call, which got disconnected. On a subsequent call I was connected to a rep whose English was so poor I couldn't understand almost anything he said. He was also useless. He wanted to connect me to another rep, but I begged him not to put me on hold. He claimed that he could not contact another rep without putting me on hold. Obviously Airbnb's support infrastructure is as inadequate as its reps. Eventually I got connected to a higher level rep. That rep was also virtually impossible to understand. There was so much echo in the audio at her end I had to have her repeat everything she said at least 3 times. The echo rep told me she would have to hang up the he called to contact the host. I tried multiple times to explain to her that the host did not exist. She promised me 2 things, that she would call me back and that I wouldn't end up sleeping in the street. She never called back, and were it not for my booking a hotel 50 miles away I would have had to sleep in the street. Note, all of this took place at a college football game and the nearest available hotel room was 50 miles away, at double the normal price. Several hours later got a message on the Airbnb platform from the supposed Airbnb host, who I suspect is actually somewhere in Africa. His message gave directions that didn't make sense and didn't seem to relate to the location that was given. I later returned to the location and found the same thing. The address didn't exist and the directions didn't make sense. But by then I knew that I wouldn't be staying with this host, even if I had found a building there. His failure to respond to my texts, the disconnected phone, and Airbnb's failure to provide support told me not to trust this supposed host. The extraordinary failure of Airbnb to provide support for my situation also told me not to trust or do business with the company ever again. I hope I can convince others to stay away from Airbnb too. I know my friends who were with me at the game will never go near Airbnb after witnessing my nightmare. The company's failure to support me certainly ruined my experience of the game. I'm pretty sure it ruined my friend's day too. Later on, about 2 a.m. the next morning, I got another message from Airbnb support explaining that they would take no responsibility for their failure. They would leave it up to the host to decide if I would get a refund. In other words, they were only going to support their supposed host and not me. Finally I got another message from Airbnb that their host had decided to refund half of my payment amount. As for me, I'm done trying to get support from Airbnb, and I'm done doing business with the Going forward I intend to work with consumer advocacy organizations, the news media, communities on social media, and if possible attorneys to hold Airbnb accountable and to warn the public away from the company. I have started a Facebook group, Airbnb Nightmares, and a website may follow. Through those efforts hope I can convince as many people as possible to stay away from Airbnb. My experience clearly shows that Airbnb does not have the values, the organization or the infrastructure to properly support or protect guests. I hope no one else ends up sleeping on the street. Here is a nightmare for you. Make sure you purchase a property in an area that wants you there. I live in an historic area near downtown. We have yards, oak trees covering the streets, kids play outside, etc. It's a beautiful old-fashioned neighborhood in the middle of the city. The reason it's this way is because we work hard to keep it this way. From kicking homeless people out to blocking city trucks who tried to cut some oak trees down, to a 17-year-long legal battle over a speed bump the city installed that we didn't want. The area is extremely desirable. Between 2018 to present, investors bought 91 houses in about a 10-block by 10-block area. The constant traffic, cars parking everywhere, rude guests, noise, constant ruckus of guests checking in at all hours of the night, the Airbnbs being rented to work crews, people showing up with barking dogs, etc. was not acceptable. Then, I own a couple long-term rentals in the neighborhood. My tenants, families who had been there each over 5 years, both said they no longer feel safe here because of the constant strangers coming and going. Think about it, 91 houses, 4 to 12 new people a day, PR house flooding our neighborhood. Being around our kids, our property, we told the STR owners their hotels were not welcome here. You are welcome to move in and join the community, make it a long-term rental or just sell the property. We got the typical response. It's my property, screw you, etc. We filed zoning complaints, building code complaints, etc. So we had several hearings over a couple of years. I pulled a couple of the owners aside after one of the hearings and said, look, I'm not sure how to word this, but it's in your best interest to just open your Airbnbs in another part of town. They also will probably complain, but they will give up and leave you alone. We will never leave you alone. Most took it as advice, but one loudmouth STR owner started with the whole you can't threaten me, wait till I tell my husband, you will be sorry, etc. We didn't get anywhere with the city, so the lawsuit started. On my block alone I filed 3 lawsuits against Airbnb owners and 2 lawsuits against the real estate agents that were about to close deals to sell 2 more houses on my block to STR investors and the prospective buyers. Several other neighbors have done the same. None of the lawsuits are based on whether or not STRs are allowed in the city. We dug deep. The goal was so many filings and so many lawsuits and so many discovery demands that they will go bankrupt just trying to cover their attorney fees. To date, we have one holdout. He has ignored all of the letters from us and the courts, so in few days we are filing for the court to compel, then default judgment. Then we will have one. All of the inconsiderate holes who decided to open Airbnbs in our neighborhood who didn't care that they destroyed our community will be gone. Point is, you want the worst nightmare that you can ever image, open an Airbnb in a neighborhood that does not want you there. LOL, we spent $250,000 in legal over 17 years to get rid of a speed bump. When I gave the STR owners the friendly advice to just leave, they should have taken it. To date, no idea what the total is that everyone has spent on legal getting rid of the scumbags who opened Airbnbs in our beautiful community. But it was worth it. Mine is ongoing. We have relatively new, 3 to 4 years, neighbors who live behind us. I've never met the wife or even seen her. The husband is late 50s early 60s and looks creepy as shit. Thin long white hair, about 30 pounds overweight, and always wears a retro Bulls jacket and slacks. Every single morning I go to work, he's walking his dog. Every day I get home he's doing the same. He oftentimes walks right along the property line between our houses and stares into our bay window. One day me and my brother and his 2 little kids were sitting on the front porch getting ready to walk to the park to play basketball when he walked up and started talking to them, asking weird questions and generally giving off creep-ass vibes. Me and my brother asked him a few times what his dog's name was and he seemed caught off guard and never answered us, always dodged the question and kept talking to my niece and nephew. He looks like a textbook serial killer. My mom lays in the backyard all the time in the summer tanning wearing a bikini, and she has caught him staring at her before through a gap in the bushes that separate our properties on the eastern side. Our workout room has a door to that backyard and I commonly hit my bowl a few times right outside the door, and one night I went out for a few hits and heard creepy ass whistling. It was especially creepy BC. It was raining, virtually no visibility, and it was so close. So fucking sketchy. I slammed the door and locked it and checked the doors after that. If he's just a weird old man or if he's actually not mentally there, but the dude is so weird. Oh, and I just remembered another thing. When I'm driving past when he's walking his dog, he stares at me until I'm out of view. The entire time, every single time. I know this BC. I check my mirrors to see if he's still staring, and yup. WTF, dude. I was about 16 at the time. Me and a few friends were hanging outside a school just down the street from where he lived. It was around 11 p.m. and we were sitting underneath a streetlight in the school's parking lot. A few kids about 10 or 11 years old, accompanied by a kid about our age, passed the school, probably 40 feet from where we were. We didn't think much of it, but it was kind of strange to see at 11 at night. We just went back to what we were doing. About 5 minutes pass by, and a group of 4 or 5 guys, about 18 or so, are running past. They slow down, and one of them yells over to us and asks if we've seen a group of kids nearby. We just answered with a quick no, and went back to what we were doing. They walked over to the school sign, which was about 80 feet from us. There they stood, just acting like they were hanging out. We didn't think much of it, but after a while we started heading back to his house. We noticed that they were looking at us as we were crossing the street. We hurried and got back to his house. We were kind of weirded out by it, so we thought we should probably just lock up the house. We were all hanging out in his living room, about 2 minutes after we got back. His front door starts shaking and the doorknob was moving. We all looked at each other like, is this really happening? Then there was banging on the door. I peeked out through the window onto the porch. Sure enough, there was one of those guys from earlier, standing there ramming into the door. We had no idea where his friends were, but we all grabbed things to defend ourselves just in case any of them were to get in. One of my friends went into his kitchen to check his patio door. The guy at the front door ran off the porch. We went into the kitchen thinking maybe he was going to try the back of the house. It was just a glass sliding door after all. We waited and waited, for nothing. He left. I have no idea what the guy's intentions were, if he would have got in, who he was, nor why he followed us back and why none of his friends seemed to be with him. But thankfully none of them ever came back. But it was one heck of an experience. There was an airman in the dorms at some base, which. Good airman, never any issues. He was Hispanic and very religious, and that demographic takes ghosts and spirits very seriously. Well, apparently, this airman started showing up to work late, messy, out of regs, and performing poorly increasingly over the course of a few weeks. He had a good track record, so at first his supervisors were giving him the benefit of the doubt, but it went on too long and got too frequent that they had to talk to him about it. He said nothing, didn't explain what was going on, just basically sat there and let the supervisors talk to him. Well, this behavior continued, more and more, to the point where he started getting in trouble. LOCs, getting chewed out, you know the usual. However, this didn't deter his behavior and it only kept getting worse, and finally, they encouraged him to go to mental health. He did, and they found out that this airman fully, truthfully in their mind, thought their dorm room was haunted. The mental health clinic did not think the airman was lying. At least the airman fully believed that there was 100% a ghost in his form, but obviously there's no ghost, right? So clearly he has a mental health issue going on. They eventually had to move to separate this individual for his psychosis and poor work performance and standards upkeep. He was a good airman, and they didn't want to, but they had to. Well, Shirt comes to the dorm to help move the airman out, and goes into the dorm closet to help get all his stuff. Shirt looks up at the ceiling, and in a vent, no shit, he sees a face staring back at him through the vent. Shirt absolutely shits himself. Lo and behold, an airman who had gone AWOL was literally living in the fucking walls of the dorm's building, and would particularly use this airman's dorm to go to the bathroom, stretch out, what. So airman number 1 would be laying in bed and literally hear another person crawl from out of the wall, out of their closet and nonchalantly waltz into his bathroom and back into the wall on a regular basis. No fucking shit, he thought his dorm was haunted, especially considering his background. Airman number 2, the ghost, was removed from the base and airman health improved and was able to stay in the Air Force. Happy ending.